Good afternoon. While on my final college tour, before deciding on the future of my education, I watched the 1967 film The Graduate, which tells the story of a young man, coincidentally named Benjamin, who struggles to find purpose in life after his college graduation. Generally, I hate to give spoilers, but you've all had 46 years to watch it, so I think it's safe to reveal that in the end, Benjamin does find some level of direction and some level of happiness when he breaks free from the cycle of preparing for the day that real life starts and begins living for the moment. Among folks like us, I think it's common to refer to adults as real people, to get nervous for graduation because it's the start of real life. After all, this ceremony is called commencement. I'm often surprised to see friends a few years older than I, whom I knew from my childhood doing adult things, and I think, wow, they've made it. But what have they made it to? What landmark have they reached in their lives that makes their actions and decisions more significant, more important, and more real than mine? The truth is, their actions and decisions simply aren't any more important than ours. A friend of mine spent this past semester on a program in Nepal. The group did homestays in a farming village where my 19-year-old friend lived in a house in which he was the oldest resident. He was amazed by the hospitality of the 17-year-old woman, her 15-year-old husband, and their 2-year-old son. One would be hard-pressed to argue that the decisions of this poverty-stricken family were not real. When living in such a situation at our age, one has no choice but to reject the notions that our priorities have to lie in the future, because needs become so much more immediate. At the same age as this Nepalese couple spent their time and energy worrying about how they would feed themselves and their child, we have been spending our time and energy worrying about how we would get into college. While some of us may get into college with an outlook of drawing the most out of every moment that we are alive, many of us may still spend those years preparing for something afterward, be it grad school, a career, or anything else that requires the approval of others. There are those of us that might graduate and get a job and that we may not like in the slightest. Perhaps we will tell ourselves that we have to endure so that we can get a better deal the next time around. Or maybe we will tell ourselves that we actually are happy, because accepting the fact that all the time spent preparing was in vain is simply too painful. But there is another path, which I truly am convinced that all of us are destined to find eventually. This is the path of living for ourselves. Not our past selves or future selves, but for ourselves as they exist in the present. This is the path of living for the moment. From such a young age, the image of a ladder to success is driven into our heads. At any point along this ladder, though, we can jump off. When we do this, we will realize that the ladder is actually lying flat on a plane, and that we can go anywhere on that plane by walking, while climbing will only get us to one predetermined location. We can change course at any time that we want. At the same time as this notion of a ladder is being taught to us, we are also so frequently asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? This, I think, is one of the most dangerous questions that one can ask of a child, because it ignores a much more important question. What do you want to be now? The child who is never asked the more important question will likely go through life never figuring out that they don't have to be a slave to the preparation for the elusive day that real life begins. As I imagine that most of us were never asked the more important question, I suggest to you all that the first step in avoiding this sad fate is to recognize that nothing starts today simply by virtue of this ceremony. It is to recognize that yesterday, tomorrow, and every day of our lives has been and will be real, and that it is our responsibility to ensure that each one of those days is full of love, joy, meaning, laughter, and growth. I say all this not to detract from the significance of this day, but in an attempt to empower myself, my peers, and any of the other folks in this room that need that kind of empowerment. I think I speak for most of us when I say that today, while no more real than any other day of our lives, is actually significant as the close of one chapter and the open of another. Today is a day to celebrate, not because it marks the start of anything more real than what we've experienced in the past, but because in the chapter that this celebration marks the end of, we have all moved further along our journey, 4 years closer to the day that we learn to live for the moment, and learn to reject sadness and regret in order to embrace joy and happiness. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Our next speaker today is